check the mic 1, 2, and clap so I can sync it up nicely. And now I'm going to do the demo. So what we're doing here is a parallax animation. And so that's going to be kind of like essentially, we're going to take a static image and we're going to kind of make it have some three-dimensional visual interest, essentially. And so what we need for this assignment is we're going to need an image, an illustration, a picture, something that we can break up into separate planes. And what I mean by separate planes are we have a foreground. These two layers, for instance, are my foreground. So we have a foreground, and we have a midground, and then we have a very background. Okay? And it's important that we can kind of stack these up on each other, and that we have this stuff behind it, that we have this plate essentially. Because once we start shifting between these layers, it's going to kind of reveal what's behind this foreground, and then it's going to reveal what's behind the midground. And if we don't have something in that spot, then we're just going to see our alpha channel. So it's important that all of these separate planes have some kind of overlap to them, essentially, if that makes sense. And so with our 3 separate planes selected, whether you're in Illustrator or whether you're in Photoshop, we are going to export these. And I'm going to export as. And when we export things, it's going to give us all these options and stuff. And this is, again, a spot where I like to do kind of my flight check. And I kind of just go over all this stuff before I just hit export and wonder why something's not working. So I do a little flight check here. Okay, so these are all going to export. The size, it's going to be scaled 1x, so it's going to kind of export them the size that they currently are. And I can see that here, 2,000 pixels wide and all this stuff. So that tells me if I make my composition 1080 by 1080, these are going to come in pretty large. So I already know that I already kind of have some expectations, essentially. And I can set those expectations based upon how I export my file. So I am going to export these 3 layers. And I think before I do that, though, it's probably smart if we name them correctly. So maybe if I can rename them. I'll name this foreground. And I'll name this midground. And I'll name this background. I never actually started naming layers until I had to be like a professional person who got paid for design. But man, the sooner you do it, you're just going to enjoy things a lot better. Just work kind of smart. And so we have our layers named. And with all 3 layers selected, I'm going to export them. And again, I'm going to flight check. Okay, all of this stuff is kind of how I want it. And then it'll probably ask where we want it. And so I'm going to tell it here in my Parallax layers file. So you would probably hit open and then save. I'm just going to hit cancel. Okay. And so we have our 3 layers. And we're in After Effects. We've opened up After Effects. And we've selected a new project. And so we're on this screen. And so currently there's nothing in here. Over here is our project bin. This kind of tells us what files and stuff that we've exported. So currently we don't have anything. And let's click New Composition. And again, this is a spot where I like to do my flight check, essentially. So I know that my parallax animation is going to be a square composition. And I know that my images I just exported are like 2,000 pixels wide. So I know that I'm probably going to have to scale them down when I import them. But I'm going to keep this at a 1080 by 1080 sized composition. So it created this composition, and that's nice. But we need to kind of import our layers into here. So I always hit Command I, Command I. But we can also just hit File, Import. Okay, And so with file import, and we're going to import a file. And let's select our parallax layers. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of drag them into my composition. And like I said, I kind of knew ahead of time that I'm probably going to have to scale these down. So I'm going to go ahead with all of them selected. I'm going to scale them down. And then I'm going to kind of get these set up correctly. Like right now, our background is in the foreground. We don't want that. So background, I'll name these really quickly. So our background, I'm going to put that all the way in the back. And then our foreground, I'm going to check, make sure that's in the very front. And then obviously our midground is in the middle. And so this is good. I already see, like I see back here, this layer can kind of come up a little bit because it's, kind of showing our alpha channel. And so now I need to kind of convert all these into 3D layers. And so your timeline might look like this, just showing this stuff, okay? But we're gonna need some other settings. So let's open up, let's expand these options here. And one of those options is gonna give us this column. And that column is gonna have this thing that's called motion blur. It's gonna call it adjustment layer and then 3D layer. And so with all of our layers selected by hitting Command A or just, select Shift, hold Shift and select all your layers. I'm gonna convert these into 3D layers. And so that's good. But if we open up our position properties, you're gonna notice that, we can move them left and right. But now we have this, because they're 3D, we have a Z property. We can move them left and right and up and down in space, but we can also move them forward and backward in space. And so if we look at these, where they're at in Z space, they're all at 0, right? They're all in the very exact same plane. And if I just move our midground like forward, it'll immediately kind of cover up our thing right there, because they're all right on top of each other, okay? And so just like Walt Disney, wherever he was, we want to separate all of these layers so they're not just sitting on top of each other, okay? And so we can do that now that they're 3D layers. So as what I'm going to do with my foreground selected, I'm going to come to its Z space and its position kind of forward and backwards, and I'm going to push it very forward, very closer to our camera essentially. We don't have a camera in there yet, but this is it's the same thing. So we're just pushing it closer in space to our viewing point. And in doing so, now it's kind of scaled incorrectly. So I'll just kind of scale it back down. This isn't moving it in space. This just is scaling it. So, so we've got our snow globe and our desk separated, but currently our midground and our background, they're still on the same exact spot in Z space. And you can see that by here. It's 0, 0, and 0, 0 here. So if I move our background forward, it's going to come in front of our midground in space. I don't want that. We want to actually push it way back. We want to push this way back. The more space we have in between these layers, the more of a parallax effect we're going to get. So I'll push this way, super far back, okay? But I have a problem now that I've pushed this so far back. I kind of need to reposition it in our composition and then also scale it up so that we're not kind of revealing our alpha channel. So I'm scaling it up. I'm not moving it in Z space. It's still existing way far back there. Okay, so just like Walt Disney, we've now separated our layers. We have a midground, a background, and a foreground. But now we need to import a camera. We need to put a camera in here so that we can kind of push that camera through space. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Layer, New, and I'm going to go to New Camera. And can you remind me your name? Micah, yeah. And so Micah has all kinds of fancy ways of like pulling up stuff, and she tripped me up last class because they pulled up a camera from a different spot, and it didn't really work. So I always suggest just kind of following me along and clicking the same windows that I click. So from here, from our layer section, I'm going to hit new, and I'm going to go to new camera. Okay. And so for our photography friends out here, this is where we can kind of tell our camera what to be. And if we adjust this millimeter setting, it's going to make things look differently. So I always recommend, if you don't know a whole lot about photography and that kind of stuff, let's just kind of keep this to our default settings. And so that's fine. It's not going to change anything. But now we just have to animate one thing. We don't need to animate all these other layers. They just need to stand still in space. And what we need to move is our camera through those. And so just like our other 3D layers, our camera has this Z property that I can use to push it forward and backward in space. It has these other properties that I can use to move it up and down in space and left and right in space. But the one I'm focusing on is this one that's going to move it forward and backward in space. And so I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to move this property all the way up until I'm like very close here, right? And I'll set a keyframe for its position here. And then I will go to like 3 seconds in our animation. And I'm just going to now take that camera that's all the way far back, and I'm just going to kind of pull it back through our composition. And so in doing that, we're going to kind of reveal these other layers, and we're going to get all this nice shifting going on, and this kind of overlap of layers. And it's going to create a kind of a sort of fake three-dimensional look. And that's really nice. And so we had a question last time about, okay, well, I want it to kind of start maybe more over at where the window is. And we can do that. But I always recommend using a null object to kind of like, we parent our camera to this null object, and then we animate that null object. And it's just kind of a cleaner way of working. So if we have like a very specific direction that we want our camera to take through our scene, we can do this. We can add in a null object, new null object, okay. And let's parent our camera to this null object. All right, that's good. So now anytime I move our null object's position, our camera is gonna kind of adhere to that. So I'll set a keyframe here for its position at the beginning, and I'll kind of get this where I want it to be visually, okay. And, oh, that's not going to work. Right there. Maybe I shift it over here. Okay, that's nice. And I can always still come into these layers and move them again, right? I can still move these however I want. Because those are not the things I'm animating. What I'm animating is our camera, right? So let's watch this play through. It might look a little weird at the end, yep. So we're kind of revealing some alpha channels here. And in order to kind of not have that happen, I'll just kind of animate our null object here at the end so that things kind of settle where we want. And so, yeah, now that we've got these two things kind of animated, we can play through it, and it's going to kind of zoom through our scene, and we have a little bit of control now, is what I'm saying, in terms of like how we want that to come in through and reveal the different elements in our scene. And so for this assignment, I'm not looking for you to kind of make some very chaotic, movement of our camera. If you just want to have it to zoom from the middle out, that's fine. But yeah, this is like a very nice way of taking static imagery, static assets, and adding a lot of depth and animation to them and making them a lot more visually interesting. And it's a